Madam President, I'm joined on the floor by my colleague, Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, who recently visited coastal Louisiana and will share his observations following my remarks. And he will speak objectively about that which we in Louisiana see not only objectively, but emotionally. We see our coastline melting away. And with the loss of that coastline, increasing vulnerability to hurricanes coming off the Gulf, as well as a loss of villages, beautiful oak trees as salinity kills their roots, and whole communities and ways of life. And I shall elaborate. Because Louisiana's coastal erosion impacts local businesses, communities, but I would say even our entire nation. Some of the nation's most important trade, energy, and commercial fishing assets are associated with South Louisiana. Now, every senator gets up and is proud of his or her state, and they will make statements such as that, but these statements objectively are true. 5 of the 25 largest ports in the country by tonnage are located in South Louisiana and along the Mississippi River. 20% of the nation's waterborne commerce moves through Louisiana. Approximately 11,000 vessels use the lower Mississippi annually. And if you think of a map of our country, from Wyoming to Pennsylvania, that is the territory of our country drained by the Mississippi and its tributaries. And if you're shipping goods from Ohio to South America, most likely you're sending it down the Mississippi. The prosperity of the farmer along the Missouri River can depend upon the navigation of the lower Mississippi. It is truly a nation-impacting resource. But coastal erosion threatens the flow of commerce that is essential and vital to all these areas. Approximately 20% of the nation's oil supply originates off the coast of Louisiana, and countless oil field service companies are located in South Louisiana to process that energy. Companies like Cheniere, Tellurian, Sempra, and others are investing billions in liquefied natural gas facilities, demonstrating the value of the United States, but of Louisiana in particular in the global LNG market. And by the way, the workers that work in these rigs or work in these industries may live in Louisiana, but sometimes they will live far inland. I saw a map where somebody commuted from Montana, coming down by airplane, working for a month, and then going back to Montana. So the folks that work in our energy industry may come from any parts of our country. Coastal erosion puts this energy infrastructure in jeopardy, threatening our nation's energy security. Louisiana has the largest commercial fishing industry in the lower 48, harvesting and selling shrimp, crawfish, crabs, and oysters to restaurants and grocery stores around the country. Coastal erosion puts this industry and the livelihoods of the workers who depend upon it in jeopardy. For these reasons, among many more, I fight in Congress to protect the Louisiana coastline. Senator Whitehouse frequently has a floor chart when speaking on the issues, on environmental issues. It says, "Time to wake up." Everyone in Louisiana is very awakened to this crisis. Our state has developed its coastal master plan to help restore and maintain our coast. I think Senator Whitehouse will refer to that. And we may not be able to save every parcel of land, but it is imperative that we work to protect the vulnerable marshland as we can, and in turn, the businesses and communities from the effects that we see today. By the way, oftentimes we only hear about industry and environmental organizations attacking one another. But in Louisiana, we found that without one, the other cannot survive. We have found that the environmentalist and the energy industry has a way to coexist and to work for the betterment of the other. The state, as one example, the state receives revenues from offshore energy production and other grant programs to protect and restore our coastline. Louisiana's Constitution mandates that these dollars go to coastal restoration, creating a unique partnership where the royalty payments from the energy industry fund the environmental restoration upon which my state's future depends. Projects funded with this revenue include the Mid-Barataria and Mid-Breton diversion projects designed to direct more sediment from the Mississippi River to rebuild marshland lost due to coastal erosion, in part because the Mississippi River was previously leveed. Other projects seek to protect vulnerable marshland from further losses by controlling saltwater intrusion in the Houma Navigation Canal or the Calcasieu River Ship Channel. However, more needs to be done to protect Louisiana's coastline and its impact upon the United States' economic and energy security. In a previous Congress, I introduced legislation in the House and now in the Senate to amend the Gulf of Mexico Energy Security Act to provide more offshore energy revenue to energy-producing states in the Gulf to fund coastal restoration and other environmental protection projects. Most recently, in the Tax Cut and Jobs Act bill, I was able to increase, in another bill, I was able to increase the current cap on GOMESA dollars for fiscal years 2020 and 2021. I'm currently working on another version of revenue sharing legislation for the Gulf states, which I plan to introduce later this spring. As part of that effort, working with Senator Whitehouse's staff, we've been working on legislation to create a revenue sharing program with the federal and state governments for offshore wind to fund coastal resiliency efforts, an issue important to us, but probably about the 80% of America's population that I roughly judge live within 100 miles of a coastline. I look forward to working with Senator Whitehouse and other colleagues to ensure that the coastal restoration needs important to Louisiana and to the United States are met. Again, I so appreciate Senator Whitehouse coming to visit and learn more about coastal Louisiana. I look forward to working with him on our mutual interests to protect our environment and our communities, and I yield back.
Madam President.
Senator from Rhode Island.
I am very grateful to be joined by the senior senator from Louisiana on the floor today. I think this is about 240 in my series of Time to Wake Up speeches, and it represents the first time that we have a bipartisan presentation on the floor, which is significant to me. I had the great pleasure of visiting Louisiana last month to see firsthand how a combination of decreased sedimentation, erosion, subsidence, habitat degradation, and rising seas are threatening Louisiana's coastline. I was joined by Congressman Garrett Graves, who's the former Louisiana Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority chairman, and I thank the congressman for sharing his time and expertise of Louisiana's coastal issues. I have also enjoyed working with Louisiana's junior senator on coastal resiliency efforts, and I look forward to continuing that work. Senator Cassidy and I share home states that are lively, diverse, coastal, proud, a little bit eccentric, have great food. There's a lot in common between Louisiana and Rhode Island. Like Rhode Island, Louisiana's coast drives the state's economy and has shaped the state's history and culture. Coastal Louisiana is home to around 2 million people and is responsible for over a quarter of the continental United States' fisheries landings. According to the U.S. Geological Survey, Louisiana's wetlands today represent about 40% of the wetlands of the continental United States and about 80% of the losses. Coastal wetlands are critical habitat and nurseries for commercially important fisheries and other wildlife. They also improve coastal water quality and buffer against storm surge, flooding, and other storm effects. Across the United States, we have lost ground. About half of our original wetlands in the past 200 years are gone. That is significant, but the scale and speed of wetland loss in coastal Louisiana is almost impossible to comprehend. From 1932 until 2010, the state lost nearly 1,900 square miles, or 25% of its coastal land. All the red is land loss from 1932 to 2010. Between 1985 and 2010, the state is losing ground about a football field's worth every hour Hurricanes Katrina, Rita, Gustav, and the like, and Ike caused the loss of more than 300 square miles of wetlands. I saw firsthand what Louisiana's shredded coastline looks like from the air. The Mississippi River is one of the most heavily managed rivers in the world. It is certainly one of the most important rivers in the world. A combination of flood prevention and irrigation interventions upriver have cut off the tap of sediment that used to flow naturally to Louisiana's wetlands. So now erosion outpaces natural rebuilding. Though erosion is a natural phenomenon, oil and gas development exacerbates the problem. The dredged tracks left in the marsh by exploration and pipelines accelerate erosion. And here you see photos we took from our little airplane of some of those dredged channels. Strong storms, ratcheting up in strength on warmer ocean waters, thanks to climate change, also take a heavy toll on these vulnerable marshes. And you can see how these have been just washed out by the sea. Down here as well, again, looking at our little aircraft. Thank you, by the way, to South Wings for sharing their aircraft with us so we could fly and see this. On top of sediment loss, the Louisiana coastline is also sinking at around 1/3 of an inch each year due to the natural movement of the Earth's surface. And oil and gas development probably accelerates that process. And then there's sea level rise. Louisiana's Coastal Planning and Restoration Authority estimates as much as 2.7 feet of sea level rise by 2050. Tulane University researchers concluded current sea level rise estimates for Louisiana are actually probably too conservative, as the tide gauges used to track sea level rise don't accurately account for the fact that coastal marshes are sinking at the same time. So these current sea level rise projections don't fully express what the relative sea level rise is expected to be. Following Hurricanes Katrina and Rita, Louisiana undertook the daunting task of assembling a coastal master plan. This 50-year, $50 billion plan identifies 124 projects aimed at maintaining 800 square miles of land over time. Experts there hope to reduce over $150 billion in damage by 2067 through a combination of hard infrastructure, restoring shoreline and barrier islands, diverting sediment, and protecting structures by doing things like flood-proofing and elevating them. The Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority, which led the development of this master plan, looked at 3 potential scenarios for the next 50 years that considered changes in precipitation, sea level rise, subsidence, and storm frequency and intensity. We'll look at the medium scenario. Under the medium scenario, the Coastal Authority expects more precipitation, over 2 feet of sea level rise, stronger though less frequent storms, and a continued slowing of subsidence. The agency then modeled what the coastline would look like 50 years out under these medium conditions, with and without this $50 billion investment. Without the $50 billion investment, all that is red is lost to the sea. With the investment, there's still a lot of red lost, but these green areas show areas that are saved. And if you live in one of these green areas, hunt in one of these green areas, have a business in one of these green areas, it's pretty darn important to you to see that they are saved. Louisiana is at a point of no return, where the forward march of sea level rise and stronger storms will continue to erode the state's shore. Although Louisianans are faced with this discouraging future, I was very impressed by the optimism of the Louisianans I met. I spoke with Governor John Bel Edwards, with CPRA Chairman Chip Klein, CPRA Director Bren Haas, and Deputy for Coastal Activities Megan Terrell, and had dinner together with many of them and Senator Cassidy to discuss implementation of this coastal master plan. The governor, who has said climate change is real, I do not deny it, is committed to implementing the Coastal Master Plan. The price tag is hefty, but the potential losses to Louisiana are much greater. I also went to Baton Rouge and met with Mayor President Sharon Weston Broome. While I was there in Baton Rouge, the Mississippi was steadily climbing the levees that protect the city. These are the handrails for the steps down to the Mississippi River, and as you can see, it was high enough that it was not only over the steps, but over the handrails. By March 21st of this year, the number of days at or above flood stage in Baton Rouge was on track to set new records. The mayor pointed out that getting the help communities need to prepare for severe but unnamed storms can be difficult, which is why I so appreciate working with Senator Cassidy on ways to improve our response to coastal resilience, both of ours being coastal states. Following the release of the 5th National Climate Assessment back in November, Mayor President Broome said, "After the 1,000-year rain event of 2016 in my city, I've been paying close attention to credible projections for future events. Combined impacts of sea level rise and storm surge in the southeast have the potential to cost up to $60 billion each year in 2050 and up to $99 billion in 2090. That level of impact cannot be dismissed or put off for the next generation to deal with." Baton Rouge is home to Louisiana State University, the LSU Tigers, and the impressive Center for River Studies. This is a room, the main room at the Center for River Studies. This is an enormous physical model of the Mississippi River through which actual water runs and through which they can put small sort of simulated sediment to model sediment flow, and these projectors on the roof can project down onto the surface to show various models and to provide all this color. So that's actually like a flat movie screen with projectors on the surface that is three-dimensional in the sense that they've built a model Mississippi River through it. It is an amazing educational tool, and it lets researchers at LSU and at the Army Corps of Engineers and others better understand these sediment dynamics in the Mississippi River. I want to ask consent to add to the record, speaking of Baton Rouge, a terrific article by the legendary Louisiana Pulitzer Prize-winning outdoor columnist Bob Marshall, entitled "With Climate Change, Storm Surge Now Could Reach Baton Rouge." Without objection, may I have that?
Without objection.
Thank you. After Baton Rouge, I went to the legendary city of New Orleans, where I met with Mayor LaToya Cantrell. Around half of that city lives below sea level. Strong partnerships between the public and private sectors helped make the city a national leader in resiliency planning. In 2017, the city's Climate Action for a Resilient New Orleans plan pledged to cut greenhouse gas emissions by 50% by 2030. In March, New Orleans sued 11 oil, gas, and pipeline companies for damage to the wetlands that protect the city from storm surge and flooding. Mayor Cantrell spoke to me about learning to live with water in the post-Katrina city. I visited with community leaders in the recovering lower 9th Ward, who are turning wetlands restoration projects in the area into education, community engagement, tourism, and other opportunities to rebuild a healthy connection between the city and the water that surrounds it. I also met with a number of community leaders to discuss how businesses, nonprofits, researchers, and government agencies work together to save Louisiana's working coastline. I heard from a business owner about a property that he's having difficulty insuring due to anticipated flood risks. I learned about the changes fishermen see in the Gulf and how some of them have switched to non-traditional fisheries or changed careers completely. And hunters and recreational fishermen notice worrying changes in their sportsman's paradise. Though the evidence of climate change is everywhere in Louisiana and is reshaping the lives of Louisianans, the phrase climate change still brings apprehension in some circles. Well, let me go back a second, because this is us in the 9th Ward, and here we are with some of the boats down in the fishing pier off of the Mississippi. And I'll describe a little bit more. This is the inlet that flows to Davis Pond and has brought water and sediment to the Davis Pond area. You can't see this very clearly, but these are white pelicans. I've never seen so many in my life together. It's kind of rare for a Rhode Islander to see a white pelican. Here they're so thick, they pile in because the fish get drawn in coming off the river, and it makes a wonderful chow line. So there's a big population of white pelicans that have learned to show up at this time of year and enjoy the chow line at this particular entry point. So I do want to say that although there is some hesitancy about talking about climate change in some quarters, some people are not hesitant. And again, I refer to the legendary Bob Marshall, who has described this as the mugging of the atmosphere by our emissions. Having spoken with resiliency experts and seen Louisiana by both sky and in that terrific LSU model, I then took to the water to visit this restoration work in action. Davis Pond here and here was conceived as a freshwater diversion to push back saltwater intrusion into the marshes with counterpressure from added saltwater. But it turned out that it grew marshland, and it is now teeming with coastal wildlife and dozens of different bird species. Here we are, we traveled in an airboat to get down there. I also visited hunter and fisherman Ryan Lambert at his lodge in Buras. He showed me some of his personal efforts to restore the delta and its wetlands. I'm here out on his boat, driving around in the area that he's been working, pointing out how quickly, if you give nature a chance, she can rebound. A scientist with the National Wildlife Federation counted over 30 species of birds just while we were waiting to board the boat, and he spotted over 40 species while we were out on the water. The sights and sounds of a healthy marsh were encouraging and a reminder of nature's God-blessed ability to find a way to not only survive but flourish, given the chance. Louisiana faces challenges ahead, but Louisianans are united in a David versus Goliath scale battle to protect their state. To achieve that goal, I believe Louisiana must urge its fossil fuel tenants to accept responsibility for the climate crisis and to commit to being part of the solution. Louisiana could be the crucible of compromise between the environment and the industry. So thank you to all the wonderful advocates, researchers, and community and state leaders I met during my visit to Louisiana. Thank you to Senator Cassidy for his hospitality to me while I was down there. The dedication of the Louisianans I met to their coast is admirable and inspiring, and Louisiana's coastal master plan is a model for other coastal states. I'd also like to thank the senior senator from Louisiana for welcoming me the way he did and for joining me here today. This is a big moment for me to have this be the first bipartisan time to wake up. We share a commitment to giving our coasts the respect, attention, and support that they are due. And I look forward to working together with Senator Cassidy to find opportunities for our government to play its role in supporting our coasts, their resiliency, and their restoration. Thank you, my friend. I yield the floor.